First of all, welcome everybody. Can everybody hear me? Is it good? All right. My name's Eamon Ormseth, and I'm the interfaith organizer for Salam, the organization that's been working together to put on Celebrate Islam Week. We had a great banquet on Monday. We had a great film screening on Tuesday. We talked about travels to the Islamic world on Wednesday. And now we're here tonight to hear Mr. Dawood Yasin from Zaytuna College at UC Berkeley speak. I'm going to have my campus pastor and friend, John Lund, introduce him. But before we get started, I just wanted to offer some gratitude for, number one, everybody in Salam who took the time to put this week together, as well as all the sponsors that made this week possible. So for tonight's lecture, we received funding from a few different organizations. The first organization was the student government of ASUM. They gave us some money, so we're very grateful for the students' contribution to this lecture. The second was a grant from the Diversity Advisory Council, and they do a mini grant fund, and they helped us get part of the way towards bringing Dawood here. And our final sponsor, and really without them it wouldn't have been possible for tonight to happen, is the Western Montana Spiritual Development Council, which is just in the program that was handed out. So the Spiritual Development Council is a fund that a number of area congregations have contributed to do just what we're doing tonight, to bring in people from around the country to talk about these spiritual topics in our communities. And we cannot express enough how great it is to have the support of a lot of local congregations, as well as the student government and the Diversity Advisory Council. So can everyone just give them a round of applause before we get started? And the last thing is, if you just turn your programs to the back, we do have two final events for Celebrate Islam Week. And those are the Dances of Universal Peace from 6 to 8, Saturday at Congregation Har Shalom, which will incorporate some sacred phrases from Islam in a dance that everybody can join. And the following day we have Crossing the Bridge, which someone from our group has spent a lot of time developing. It's a workshop, a ritual really created by two Holocaust survivors, and it's designed to help us overcome some of the barriers that separate us, and to really kind of take a trip to someone else's world. So it'd be great to see everyone here at one of those events. They should be fun and enriching. So I'm going to turn it over to John, and thanks again, once again, everybody, for making it out.
Thank you all for coming. I'm John Lund. I serve as pastor at Emmaus Campus Ministry. We're a group that is Christian, that tries to welcome all people, to help them find their place and purpose, and to seek justice in our community. I want to start with a prayer, a very basic prayer to the Creator, the one called I Am, the one whose name some did not speak, the one called Allah, the one called God by some, that we might come with open hearts and love for all people and all of creation. Amen. I have a couple introductory remarks, and then I'll introduce Dawood. I think when we approach ally work, Salam is this sponsoring group standing alongside America's Muslims. It's important to ask ourselves why. Why are we doing this? Why are we in this work? Especially those of us who are white, those of us who are Christian, part of what has been dominant society in this country. So we can say the why is because there are a lot of mean-spirited people saying horrible things about Muslim people. And Muslims are having a very difficult time in our city, on our campus, in western Montana, in our country. And we know that. So that's a kind of a very straightforward, we need to stand with. But for those of us who are white and Christian or the descendants of Christians, we are also part of this longer arc of history in our country. We are the inheritors of a legacy of Christians who lived with a sense of triumphalism and what we might even call imperialistic entitlement. A version of manifest destiny that claimed that God was somehow on their side and they had the rights to other people and to land. We might be here because we remember that this was Salish ground, is Salish ground. That was not given as a gift or fairly sold, but taken by violence or the threat of violence. Justified by a process of dehumanizing the other with lies and fear-mongering, to the point where settler people felt like you just couldn't trust any native person. It was a justified practice of enslavement and eradication and extermination and the stealing of land and resources and cultural genocide that has left deep pain and deep scars that are still raw today. It's part of the history of our country, which has happened to African people and Hispanic people and Jewish people and others of color. And many of these practices were in the past, and many of us now want to say that we are different. We want to approach our native neighbors and African neighbors and say that we are different. We want to support you. And we can imagine that trust comes slowly, if ever. We're now in a time when the dominant voices of dominion in our society are making the same claims that are dehumanizing. The same claims of radicalization about Muslims. They are savages, they are inhuman, they want to kill us, we can't trust any. That is the story that's being told by Christians and others around us. In Helena, in DC. It's ironic that these voices can't give the same dignity to some that they are asking from others. Maybe we're here to reclaim what it means to be American, to reclaim what it means to be Christian if we are Christian, to go back to the deep place of compassion, of love, of equality, of dignity for all people, no matter what. To stand alongside America's Muslims is to change the narrative, is to change the story, is to make a different story about what it means to be neighbors and to be hospitable and to care for each other. That's our work right now in this time. We have to stand up. We have to speak out. Our sisters and brothers are hurting. Tonight we welcome Dawood, Yasin, who is at Zaytuna College, which is the first, maybe only, liberal arts Islamic college in the U.S., in Berkely. We had a group of us that had the joy and pleasure of visiting Zaytuna last spring on an immersion trip into the San Francisco Bay Area. They were so welcoming and so wonderful to be with. When we were there, Dawood wasn't there actually, so we didn't get a chance to meet, but somebody said, oh, you need to meet Dawood. He loves to come to Montana, would love to come to Montana, and he's a bow hunter. And so we called and we connected and said, maybe we should go bow hunting. And so Dawood came out twice last year, and we got a chance to go bow hunting, and I'm sad to report we didn't do much bow shooting. There's always next year. Dawood is currently the coordinator of Learning Outside the Classroom and takes students to different places. I know you spent some time down in, was it Baton Rouge? In Selma, where the civil rights conflict was intense, and talked about what civil rights meant in the 60s and what it means today. We're talking about doing a joint trip, maybe up somewhere in the wilderness in Montana, with students from Montana and students from Zaytuna. And that would be a wonderful thing. His work focuses on resident life, community engagement, student development, and student counseling. Also worked as the Muslim Life and Services Trip Coordinator at Dartmouth College for many years. There's more about Dawood in your bulletins. I invite you to please read that. But we are honored that you take the time out of a very busy life and family to come. I know for Dawood to fly, it's always a challenge. He doesn't know what's going to happen through security. He doesn't know how that's going to go. It is a challenge every time. So to come here is a hardship. And so from my heart, I say thank you for being with us. And it is an honor to have you with us and to share stories and to share your perspective. Please welcome Dawood Yasin.
So I greet you with Assalamu alaikum, which is a greeting of peace, a universal greeting of peace. And I thank you, Ayman, for your kind words, and John, for your kind words as well. And I thank this community for giving me the opportunity to come out and talk to you about something that is incredibly important to me, and I feel incredibly important to us as a country. There's a verse in the Quran that I'll mention. It says, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن ذَكْرٍ وَأُنثَىٰ وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. It's a verse in the Quran that says, O mankind, we have created you for male and female, and we have made you into nations and tribes so that you will come to know one another and not despise one another. When I look around this room and I see the diversity in the room, and I see the motivation to come out and engage, I feel it's a manifestation of that verse. The ability for us to come together to get to know one another, perhaps. In the capacity, I've worked as an imam in the community for years, and one of the things when we'd have people visit us post 9/11, and one of the things that just really became front and center and was a part became just very apparent in the work that I was doing was that this is the work that John talked about. I mean, a lot of times we're in academic institutions, and a lot of this happens on a theoretical level. But unless and until we can engage human beings and meet human beings and look at the faces of human beings and eat food with human beings and share stories with human beings and feel the pain that other human beings feel, then it remains theoretical. Because the one thing that I came to find out from those meetings is that it's very, very difficult to hate someone once you get to know them. But when you keep them at arm's distance, and you listen to the rhetoric that is being told about them, and perhaps even the lies that are being sowed about them, it's a lot easier at that point to hold your prejudices and hold your hatred towards that person. But did you ever really know them? So this, to me, is an opportunity for us to get to know one another. Obviously, I'm not a representative of Islam. I can't represent 1.6 billion people. I can't represent 1,448 years of history. But what I can tell you about or share with you my experiences right now and give you a little bit of history about Islam in America that I want to talk to you about that perhaps you'll find interesting. If you've heard it before, then it'll serve as a refresher. So, one of the things that I just find very interesting is when people will come up to me or my wife, give us the finger, and tell us to go back to our country. Another example, my wife and I were in a store, and bless her heart, this woman came up and she said, "I just want you to know that I don't hate you." I said, wow, and that takes courage, and I really sincerely appreciate that. But then she follows up by saying, "I know you come to this country looking for a better life." Your English is impeccable. Where did you study? These are all things that I've faced. My wife as well. So you can see where I'm going with this, right? The people that identified us as Muslims, and in doing so, wanted to immediately strip us of our American identity. Full disclosure, I'm African American. I'm a convert to Islam. I converted to Islam in 1996. My family has been in Massachusetts since 1896. My family has been living in the same house since 1928 on Nantucket Island. Right, so you want to talk about Starbucks and coffins and all of the families of the great New England, my family has been there for almost as long. Just a few years after Melville finished Moby Dick in 1951. Right? Only 40 years after that, plus minus. So long roots here. My wife, mixed African American, her mother is European American from Iowa. So it baffles me when we get into this space of go back to your country. So my response is fine. My heritage, I'm from the Cape Verde Islands off of Senegal. That's where my family is from. My great-grandfather came on a whaling schooner. Ended up in New Bedford, and then on to Nantucket Island after that. So if we're going to drop me off, we're also going to drop you off, is my response. So unfortunately, in our country, there is this myth that all Muslims arrived sometime in the later half of the 20th century. And this myth is believed by far too many Americans. And unfortunately, there are even Muslims, perhaps, that believe that. But the reality is that Muslims didn't arrive in the latter half of the 20th century. nor the 19th century, nor even the 18th century. So we're going to take a little bit of take a look at just a little bit of this history here. As I said, some of this may come as a surprise, but maybe not. So let's look at some of this pre-Columbus engagements of Islam with the New World. I'm going to just kind of talk about some names in Arabic in here and others. So Abu Hassan Ali ibn Hussein ibn Ali al-Mas'udi, born 871, died 957. Famous Andalusian historian and geographer, and a scientist. Circa 956, it's very difficult to say 956, he writes a book called Al-Murj al-Dhahab wal-Ma'adin al-Jawahir, the meadows of gold and the quarries of jewels. Arabs love this kind of rhyming of names of their books, right? And what it says, it contains the first written documentation of Muslim contact with the Americas. Mas'udi reports on an epic voyage of discovery made in the reign of the caliphate of Abdullah ibn Muhammad from 888 to 912 from the Umayyad rulers of Andalusia, which is now the Iberian Peninsula, now Spain. So you have the Umayyads who leave Damascus under their caliphate when the Abbasids take over, and they migrate, or Abdurrahman al-Thani, his name is, migrates to and sets up what is known as Andalusian Spain, around 711 or even predating that a bit more. But anyway, he writes that in 889, Kashkash ibn Sa'id al-Aswad, a resident of Cordoba, sailed west into the Atlantic with a Muslim crew from Delba, Palos. Does that name ring a bell to anybody? Why would that port be important?
Can you say it again?
Palos. Perhaps I'm mispronouncing it, and if so, I apologize. It's the same port Columbus sailed from. So we said about 600 years prior to Columbus, 3 ships. After a lengthy voyage, Kashkash encountered a new world in which Mas'udi referred to in the maps as Ard al-Majhul. Ard al-Majhul means an unknown land. And then he later returned from this monumental voyage back to Andalusia. Second voyage. Further documentation of Andalusian Muslims in contact with the Americas are found in the works of Abu Bakr ibn Umar al-Qaytani. Qaytani narrates that Ibn Farouk, a Muslim from Granada who sailed into the Atlantic in 999 under the reign of the Caliph of Hisham al-Thani, 976 to 1099. And then in February of that year, they landed what we would consider today to be the Canary Islands. Now the interesting thing is that they also returned back to Europe. They returned back to Europe. Now this is the one that I want to talk about, which is really interesting here. This third voyage. Again, found in a book called Nazat al-Mushtaq fil Ikhtiraq al-Afaq. Again, you have that kind of lyricism, right? The early lyrics of the of Muslims, kind of getting their little rhyming game on. Excursions of the longing one and crossing the horizon. That was the name of the book. 12th century volume by Sharif Abu Abdullah Muhammad al-Idrisi, 1099 to 1166. Geographer again, physician, advisor to the court of the king of Roger II of Sicily. Idris writes that a group of 8 Muslim sailors from North Africa sailed west into the Atlantic from Lisbon, which was then part of Andalusia. Their ship was stocked with enough supplies to last them for months. After sailing for an excess of 31 days, the boat landed on a previously unknown island, presumably in the Caribbean. The party of Muslim sailors was immediately taken prisoner by a tribe of Indians, bound and held captive for 3 days. On the 4th day, a translator appeared who spoke Arabic. He questioned the sailors and apparently arranged for their transfer to another tribe of Indians. This transfer required a 3-day canoe ride. They were then freed and placed on a boat and told that their homeland was 2 months east. They finally returned back into Andalusia. So one of the fascinating things about this narrative is that the emergence of an Arab-speaking translator from among the Indians. The presence of such a person suggests a long, if forgotten, history of Muslim-Indian contact. Arabic is a difficult language. I lived in Damascus for 5 years. I've studied Arabic. I've taught Arabic. Ayman, you know this. It takes quite some time to master the language. Where would an Arabic-speaking Indian come from? There was no Rosetta Stone at that time. There was no, self-teaching YouTube or learn Arabic in 24 hours. Those things you put the headphones on and all of a sudden you can speak Arabic. That wasn't happening, right? So one of the things that they're saying is that perhaps it was from the Mandinka, from the Arab-speaking Muslims, and the commercial traders of West Africa. So now we're going to go into another idea, another points of contact of where this is happening. But I say all of this because perhaps these are narratives that we've never even heard of, that we would never even have considered. And, well, in argumentatively, or perhaps in an argument, people would say, yeah, but we're trying to establish this, and what does that mean? Because even the First Nation people were here farther before, and maybe you're barking up a wrong tree or something like that, and that's fine. And what I want to say is that these are comparing dates and pomegranates, right? Instead of apples and oranges, I'm using dates and pomegranates in terms of the group that I'm talking about. What's important, I feel, is just to establish that Muslims, this is not something new. Muslims are not in the country post-65 when the ban was lifted for non-Europeans to be able to immigrate back to the United States once again after the doors were closed in 1924. That's what I'm trying to get at right now. And that when we can do that, and when we can establish that, then maybe we won't think about someone when we see them again saying that, you don't have a long enough standing in the country to be considered an American, so to speak. And this is something that is really interesting that we have to grapple with. There was a high school right next to campus at Dartmouth, and they would ask us to come and speak to their students. And what I did one time is I came in, had a blazer, had a Dartmouth cap on, and my name's Dawood Yasin, I'm from Nantucket, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, you know what, 1 second, I have to go out, I left something outside. And when I was outside, I actually changed. And I put on a Moroccan, what's called a jubba. If you've seen that before, it's embroidered in the front, has a long hood, which actually served as the first backpack. It was known that students, if you've seen the Moroccan jubba before, they would actually put their books, that's why the hood is so large, because they would carry their books in their backs and actually walk with them, which is really interesting. Anyway, I came back in, and I spoke in Arabic. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Dawood Yasin, I'm in Nantucket, I'm in Dartmouth, blah, blah, and their jaws were like on the floor. Because then I said to them, what if you would have seen me in this at the grocery store? Am I not still that same person that walked in 7 minutes ago with a blazer on, a Dartmouth hat, and spoke impeccable, if I may say, English? Right? It flips the whole narrative in our mind. And that's what I'm hoping we can get out of this engagement, is to break these paradigms and these narratives that have been created about the other. So now that we've established that, this is pre-Columbus, let's look at this a little bit. African Muslims in the Americas. So the area that we're normally dealing with, West Africa, probably starting north with Morocco and then working its way down, Senegal, Guinea, or the Gambia, and this area. This is normally where ships were coming out of, coming over to the U.S. Several Arabic texts reference works documenting a voyage taking from southern Morocco to the Americas during the reign of King Abu Yaqub Sidi Yusuf, 1286-1307 of the Common Era, or Christian Era, whatever one prefers. According to these accounts, Sheikh Zayd ad-Din Ali al-Fadl al-Mazadarani sailed west into the Atlantic Ocean from Tarafaya in 1291. After a long voyage, he landed on a green island, again presumably in the Caribbean Sea, and later returned to Morocco. East of Ghana, now, you have the Mandinka, who had almost entirely, at that point, 12th century, had converted to Islam. Perhaps the most famous of the Mandinka kingdoms, as you may know, is in Mali, is Timbuktu, which is under threat of having the largest collection of manuscripts, of Arab manuscripts, was under threat. Some organizations have come together to try and collect them and to digitize them and save them from some of the madness and the insanity that we're seeing right now in this world. So again, Mali reaches the height of power and the prestige and the rule of Mansa Kankan Musa, the first, a devout Muslim who governed for 25 years around 1307, 1312. But mostly what is known about him was the journey, his Hajj that he made, accompanied by 6,000 people, 1,000 camels carrying supplies, an additional 80 to 100 camels, which was loaded with 100 pounds of gold each. If we use contemporary figures, at $1,300 an ounce, the amount of gold that he was carrying at that time in today's currency would be 208 million. So the reason why I say that is to talk about what happens next. Shihab ad-Din Umairi, famous Arab geographer, who gathered the pioneering information and the variety of sources about this, wrote in a book called Masalik al-Absar fi Mamalik al-Amsar, the pathways of sight in the provinces of kingdoms. He recorded a fascinating report from Ibn Amr al-Hajib, who was the governor of Cairo at that time when Sultan Musa reported that his brother had actually funded a voyage. 1285 was his rule, to 1307. He had funded a voyage, authorized 2 voyages across the Atlantic, actually. The first expedition was 400 ships. 200 were stocked with enough food, water, and gold and supplies to last cruise for several years. The command was sail as far as you could and only return when you've exhausted your food and water. After an extended period of time, only 1 ship returned. The captain reported that it had been separated from the other ships by an ocean current, quite possibly the North Equatorial or the Antilles Current, which would have placed his ship sailing from Mali surprisingly close to the Americas. The lone ship returned back to Africa. Then, he said, Abu Bakr, he then ordered construction of a fleet of 2,000 ships, half of which were used primarily for hauling supplies. The fleet sailed west across the Atlantic in either 1307 or 1311, personally commanded by Abu Bakr himself. The fleet never returned. What's interesting is that from Mandinka inscriptions reportedly found in Brazil, Peru, and the United States, it is believed that the voyages were successful and the sizable group of the Mandinka indeed landed in the New World. Because if nothing else, the ideograms that were used in some of the native tribes in South America were Mandinkan. So again, this establishes this connection, as I said, that reaches far back. Reaches far back. To say that this is not something that is new in the world that we are in. This was again confirmed by Moravian missionaries that collected some of this work, put it into a dictionary, which was later studied by modern linguists and confirmed, in fact, that this was from Madé, which is the language of the Mandinkas. But if that's not enough, how about in October 29, or 1929, when the most significant discovery was made, what is called the Pir-Reis maps. This was a set of maps found in a library in Istanbul, in Turkey, hidden away. The map was reported to be written in 1513 by Pir Muhyiddin Rais, a Turkish navigator and cartographer. The map portrayed West Africa, the Atlantic Ocean, and the Americas, and included more than that. It revealed the geographical features that were not known to Christian Europe. For example, the Andes Mountains were clearly portrayed in the correct geographical location, even though they were not discovered by Europe until Pizarro's expedition in 1527. The map directly portrayed the bends and the turns of the Etowah River in Colombia for a distance of 300 miles. So again, establishing these contacts. The Muslims were in the Americas before Columbus, but were also in the Americas with Columbus. On October 12, 1492, when Columbus discovered America, I was waiting for that, landed in San Salvador Island, the Bahamas, he had at least one Muslim and 3 Moriscos. A Morisco is a Muslim who either converted out of volition or was forced into their conversion out of Islam during the Inquisition. Right? And when was the height of the Inquisition? It's happening right at the time of 1492. What is interesting is that you find out that Columbus's battle cry is Santiago Matamoros. St. James, kill the Moors, kill the Muslims. So this expansion is also seen as a push of the Inquisition out of Europe and into the New World. But look at this. Because of the persecution, this is, again, now the interesting thing here is, and why I'm kind of looking at this, is that you hear a term, anyone heard the term taqiyya before? Has anyone heard that term before? Taqiyya? What does that normally imply? What does taqiyya normally imply? What?
When I see it used here,
Yeah.
people say that Muslims are hiding their true intentions because the Quran allows them to through this doctrine called taqiyya.
Mm-hmm.
As far as what it actually means, you can maybe enlighten.
So what he's talking about, taqiyya, is a practice in which, so the idea that it's being thrown out right now is that Muslims are really, they're just pretending to be your friends. Because really what they're trying to do is subvert the Constitution, establish Sharia law, make you all Muslims. And if not, put you to the sword. That's a narrative that allows something such as taqiyya then to be pushed and confirm that this happens. Now, the first kind of recorded practice of taqiyya, which is basically during the Prophet Muhammad's life in Mecca, there was a family called Yasin was their family, Al-Yasir. They were being persecuted. He was told to denounce God and Muhammad, and he did so. And then when he came to the Prophet Muhammad, he asked him, what was in your heart? He said, belief in God and love of you. He said, that is fine. And if they do it to you again, respond accordingly. That's taqiyya. That under duress, one is able to lie, if you will, if it will be a means to saving one's life. Now, what you have to understand also is that in Sharia, there is something which is called maqasid al-Sharia. So you have the law itself, but then you have the aims and purposes of the law. Why does the law even exist? So the maqasid al-Sharia are 5. They are preservation of life, preservation of religion, preservation of wealth, preservation of intellect, preservation of honor, of honor, yes, and then wealth. And they are actually in that order. So preservation of life means that if I am taking some sort of medication and it's Ramadan, I take the medication and I leave off my fasting. You see? So now you have this preservation of life that if you're saying, are you Muslim? And if I answer yes, then you take my life, then I would actually tell you, no, I am not. Right? So that's what's happening now in Andalusia in Spain under the Inquisition. And that's where the term taqiyya comes from. But it has been put on today to say that that's what every Muslim on this continent right now is actually hiding their true intention, which is to impose Sharia law and take over the country. I can tell you, we can't even get parking right at our congregations on Fridays. We're definitely not taking over the country. I sort of just want to put that out there. Okay, so now, Columbus. Do we know this, right? The Muslim with Columbus on the Santa Maria, Spanish explorer known as El Negro. So what does that mean? The black one, which normally would indicate that he is Moorish. Moorish are North Africans. North Africans. His name is Pedro Azela Nino, 1468 to 1505, helped navigate the Atlantic and map the islands of the Caribbean. The Moriscos, the three of them, were also all brothers, Penzone brothers. Penzone is really interesting, and I'm going to throw out my own theory here, is I think that Penzone is actually bin Zaid. Now, the reason why I say that is because there's no P in Arabic. And that's why if you have Arab speakers saying, would you like a Bebzi? Or would you like to eat some Biza? Because there is no P. So now you have Penzone, but if you replace the P with a B, you get Ben. And Ben is from Ibn, which establishes lineage, which means the son of. And then if you change zone in the Arabic language, I'm taking a stab at this, the noon and the dal in the Arabic language are called mutaqarib. They are two letters that exit from the exact place in your mouth. So now if you replace the noon with the dal, you get zod, which is close to zaid. It's just my theory. Ben Zaid from Penzone. All three of them. But again, they were Moriscos, so at one point they were Muslim. You cannot be called a Morisco if you weren't Muslim at one point in your life. Either by volition, you became Christian, or you were forced into it. Okay? Of the three brothers here, Martin was the captain of the Pinta, Vincent was the captain of the Nina, and Francisco was the pilot of the Pinta. Okay? 3 ships were captained by Moriscos. Again, it's just a history that we're not privy to, and I think which alludes a lot to what John was talking about. So now that's pre-Columbus and Columbus. I'll talk a little bit now about slavery and a little bit about antebellum time period. And I know it's a lot to cover. I mean, I could have spent the entire hour just talking about pre-Columbus. I could have spent another hour just talking about the time with Columbus and this. And so we're trying to put all of it in and then leave some time for conversation as well too. Muslim slaves in the Americas. Excellent book. I highly recommend all of you to take a look at it. It's called Servants of Allah, African Muslims Enslaved in the Americas by Dr. Sylviane Diouf. Dr. Sylviane Diouf says that perhaps anywhere from 10 to 25% of the slaves brought over to America were Muslims. And she said Muslims constitute a significant percentage of the Africans brought to the Americas in servitude. Normally they were the most educated and resistant of captive peoples. They exerted disproportionate influence in slave life in Americas. Now what they're talking about there is that they're coming out of tradition. Right? They're coming out of tradition. She documents in her book that in Senegal, almost in the upwards of 90% of Senegalese were fluent in Arabic, while at the same time, somewhere between 16 and 20% of French in France were literate in French. So they're coming out of tradition. They're coming out of an intellectual legacy. We're not talking about naked, illiterate Aboriginal people that had no culture. And again, it's this narrative that just keeps repeating itself over and over again about each group of people that are marginalized. So it's interesting here, if we leave, okay, all that Columbus stuff you're talking about, I'm not feeling that. Okay. But now here's one point that you can't negate, is that in 1501, that this is when the first slaves are brought, Muslim slaves are brought to the country. So that means in 2001, you're looking at a 500-year presence of Muslims in the Americas, if you leave off that argument. Okay? So again, now, the interesting thing is that you then have this effort and attempt by the Spanish, a royal Spanish order in 1543 explained in a new land like this one, where the Catholic faith is only recently being sowed, it is necessary not to allow the spread of the sect of the Muhammad or any other. The Spanish had a particular dread of the engagement between the Muslim population and the Native American population. And what's interesting here, I look at this and I say, well, it's interesting because if Dr. Dawood is saying that somewhere between 2.5 and 3 million Muslims were in the Americas from 1501, what happened? If the numbers right now are still at 3 million, what happened? And what you'll see is that there are things such as this, which I feel carried over. So here she talks about in the Americas and the Caribbean, not one community currently practices Islam as passed on by preceding African generations. Okay? And one of the things that they talk about is the discontinuity followed primarily from the Muslim slaves' inability to pass the religion on to other children because of the gender disparities among slaves where fewer women were imported. Disrupted family lives in the absence of proper schools and the pressure to convert to Christianity. So remote had Islam become that some grandchildren, so this is grandchildren, 2 generations, of enslaved Muslims did not even know their grandparents had been Muslim, but remembered them as worshippers of the sun and the moon. Now why is that? Why would they think of them as worshippers of the sun and the moon? Because those are 2 times of the 5 daily prayers that a Muslim would be praying at. You have your pre-dawn prayer, and you have your sunset or your late evening prayer when the moon would be out. So again, as you are pulled away from your history, as you're pulled away from your identity, as you don't know your name, you don't know your culture, you don't know your lineage, people then can begin to inform you what it is. And that's the issue that we find right now. That's also an issue that plays on the Muslim side as well too, with the type of violent extremist Islam that is being propagated as well. It's not only from the external side, say, outside, it's also happening inside. The ignorance that is happening, the lack of education that is happening, and I can say that as a convert from looking outside and then understanding and then seeking a path of knowledge. As I said, spending 5 years in Damascus. It's interesting times that we're living in. So again, this idea of Muslims being here from that time, but again, there's another quote that I'll read in here later. It says by 1860, there are almost no practitioners of Islam in the Americas at that time. So again, just asking this question. Now, one of the things I want to mention just here is just the story of this individual, what I think is just amazing. His name is Job ben Solomon, which is Ayub ibn Sulaiman in Arabic. Job being the name of the New Testament prophet Job. Direct translation to that is Ayub into Arabic. Solomon is Suleiman. The here again, the ben is Ibn. So my father's name is David. I would be Dawood ibn David or Dawood ibn Dawood, for example. Which is really interesting because this is the indication that Antonio bin Idris, i.e. Antonio Banderas, is actually Muslim. It's another joke. And also famous literary, he is, the greatest, perhaps, literary scholar that we know, Sheikh Zubair, otherwise known as Shakespeare. These are inside, Muslim jokes that we tell. Okay. So again, Job bin Suleiman from Senegal, 1731, heading to the Gambia, going there to have some transaction with the Portuguese that are there, captured, sent on a ship, or before he gets to the ship, he's of nobility, he is educated, he's literate, he's just an all-around great guy. And what he says is that if you hold on for a moment, I will get you finances from my father that will pay for my release. They wait, the letter, he writes a letter to his father, the letter makes it to his father. As his father sends a delegation back to free his son, the ship has already sailed for America. So he's on the ship. So he then, in America, he is sold to a farmer that we know of the name is Mr. Tolstoy in Maryland. And Tolstoy immediately changes his name to Simon. And that's where he says, he chooses the name from Ayub, and he calls himself Job bin Suleiman. And they say that perhaps it is because he was also indicating, he was assuming that his owner now was a man of faith, and that from the Old Testament he wanted to show that he would have the patience of Job and he would have the magnanimity, if you will, of Solomon. And what's interesting is that he is then given the task of to work in the tobacco fields. But he hasn't worked in manual labor before, so it's really difficult for him. And he becomes sick, and what happens is that then Tolstoy assigns him to graze cattle, which is fantastic because actually that's what he used to do. So he grazes cattle, it says, and one day he's out, he's praying, and this boy comes, and as he's in prostration, while praying, throws dirt in his face, and he can't take it, and he runs, and he escapes. He's captured in Pennsylvania. From Maryland, he makes it to Pennsylvania, which is really interesting. Do you know this kind of poem or this song or the story which is called Follow the Drinking Gourd? It's just, I mean, if you hike and you get outside and you say, it's just, could you imagine that? Could you imagine walking out of South Carolina and using that the Big Dipper for freedom and thinking of it as a gourd back in your home that you would drink water of and just the states. So he finds his way. He's in Maryland. He's in prison there, and he begins to inscribe Arabic on the walls. He just begins to write Arabic on the walls, and people are like, that's amazing. They've never seen Arabic written before. Literate. Then a lawyer who happens to be traveling through the area, Thomas Blut of the Anglican Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, runs into him. Okay, so this newfound reputation, his owner comes, his owner finds him, and then his owner brings him back and allows him a space to pray, and acknowledges that as an aspect of his life which is really important to him. Now, two things that I want to say here is that when he was captured, it said, by the authorities, he said two words to them. He said, Allah, Muhammad, because he couldn't speak English. And he just kept repeating that. Now, I don't know if you've seen this before, but there was a story of an Indian man a few months ago, or probably a year now, maybe less. I believe he was in South Carolina. He was visiting his son, who's a physician. He can't speak English. He's out for a morning walk. Police roll up on him, ask him what he's doing. He can't respond. They arrest him. But in the process of arresting him, and if you see the man, he probably weighed about 120 pounds. This thin, rail man from India, they body slammed him and broke his back. But I thought to myself, what does that tell us about who we are as a society where this man will say, Allah, Muhammad, and yet it is seen as, let us help you. Let us honor your dignity. And that's what I want, if nothing else, from this time together, that even with people that we disagree with, even people that we may be in opposition to, that we will at least recognize their humanity, and that we will honor that humanity, and we will uphold the dignity of that human soul. That's the message that I hope to bring, and that's something that spoke from here. So anyway, he is in prison, he's brought back. But what happened was that after being brought back, is he writes a letter to his family, writes a letter to his father, and he asks the same people that had enslaved him. He somehow figured out how the slave market worked, and realized this kind of America. Britain, Africa, Britain, America route that these ships were taking, and he asked for this letter to be brought to his father, asking for his release. So the letter doesn't make it to the captain because the ship has sailed. It makes it to Britain. When it gets to Britain, there is a philanthropist named Oglethorpe who tries to deliver it. He can't deliver it, but he's so amazed by this letter that he gives it to the chair of the Arabic department at Oxford University, John Gagner. And he has it translated. And he's so amazed at who Joe bin Yusuf is, that Oglethorpe himself pays for the manumission of Ayub. And so this is that point that I was talking about from the beginning, that, do we even know who each other? Do we even know who we are? Right? And when that door opens up for us to learn who someone is, that maybe I would have given my wealth to help you out of any situation that you're in when I come to know you. And that's something that I'm thinking about right now, of a place that we can move to as a community. As a place that we can move to as a community. After he's freed, he spent about 18 months. All of this happened in 18 months. He returns back to Africa. One other I want to talk about, Abdurrahman ibn Suri, West African nobleman, again, captured, brought to the United States. Once they find out who he is, his owner even considers him prince. He's Abdurrahman, as I said, Ibn Ibrahim Asori. Again, his story, so incredible, reaches it all the way up to the office of the President John Quincy Adams through the Secretary of State because of a letter that came from the Sultan of Morocco. Again, he wrote a letter asking for his release. It makes it to the Sultan of Morocco. The Sultan of Morocco then contacts John Quincy Adams, and actually he's released on that. So again, just an amazing story that I just wanted to talk about. From here, I just want to fast forward a little bit again, which brings us to the place that we're at, of where you now have slaves in the United States, bringing us up into kind of the time that we're in right now. Really the first point of contact where Islam begins to establish itself in the indigenous African American community is in 1913 with the noble Drew Ali, which was called the Moorish Science Temple of America. The Moorish Science Temple is an organization here. I'll just read this as an American national and religious organization founded by Noble Drew Ali, whose name was Timothy Drew. He based on the belief that African Americans were allegedly descendants of the Moors of Northwest Africa, and that they were Moorish by nationality and Islamic by faith, meaning that they were from North Africa. Now, the interesting thing that's a bit problematic about this is that this concept of Moorish comes out of slave owners saying that these black Africans could only have been educated if they were Muslims, i.e., if they were Moors, if they were Turks, or if they were Arabs, not if they were Africans. So then that also becomes problematic, because now you're adopting an identity that negates the reality of who you are, because you could never be that thing. So that's Noble Drew Ali. That movement grows, Chicago, other places like that. That brings us up to 1930. 1930 then is a member of the congregation of Noble Drew Ali in the Moorish Science Temple that then splinters off and gives us the Nation of Islam, 1930. With Fard Muhammad, who some claim was the reincarnate of Noble Drew Ali, because he died in 34, which was interesting, right? So the Nation of Islam is established, and then we move forward with that history. Obviously, Elijah Muhammad taking on after the death of Fard Muhammad, and bringing that organization to what it is. You know the story, obviously, of Malcolm X is coming through the nation, Muhammad Ali, others at that time influenced Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, many others that have kind of working as kind of the first roots of Islam, of indigenous Islam in America. And again, the time is short, and there's just so much to talk about this. But again, that kind of gives you a snapshot. It gives you an idea, just at least to say, wait a minute, this thing is not new in this soil. This isn't something that's new in this soil. So again, just looking a little bit here, you know, it's hard to put an exact number on the amount of Muslims that are in the U.S. because by law and the census surveys, you can't ask religious affiliation. And again, I'm just kind of looking at some of this. The history here, we talked about that, 2.5 to 3 million Americans. But again, as we said, that by the 1860s, that 2 generations after the import of slavery had ceased, that there really was no practice that was happening. But the modern kind of immigration to the United States was a decade so after the Civil War, mostly of people that were coming from the Levant, which is modern-day Syria, Palestine, Jordan. Some consider it Iraq, some don't. But again, that's really where it comes from. You have some of the oldest masajid in the country, the Yemeni masjid that's happening in Iowa, Brooklyn, New York as well too, over on State Street and other places such as that. So again, as we said, the doors, as immigration is happening, the doors are closed in 1924 through legislation. They're opened back up in 1965, and that's normally when people start to say that's how long Muslims have been here. But as we know, as we said, we've seen this before, that relationship has happened much before that. So let's just talk about quick just some of the reasons. You know, one of the reasons obviously being refuge, right? People are coming here seeking refuge, tragic events that are happening in predominantly Muslim countries, right? Led to the direct emergence of ethnic communities inside of the U.S. And if you think about that, you know, you begin to think about and you begin to connect the dots here. You're talking Iraqis, you're talking Afghanis, you're talking Somalis. Look at what's happening inside of their countries and why this refugee status is happening. Not also to say that internally there were not issues in those countries prior to these things, but again, war normally being the driving force as to why we're seeing these large groups of people from those places coming out of there. So again, that brings us again to the immigrant status in our country. We're about at time. What I wanted to do now is just kind of open the floor up for some discussion and some talk around that. I thank you for giving me your attention. I thank you for coming out this evening. And I really just, I have incredible gratitude for all of you being here. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with 1924 and 1965 doors closed, doors opening. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Tell us a little bit more. Is that for Muslims?
No, non-Europeans. 1924 was closed for non-Europeans. Yep, and then opened back up in 65. Now, you did have Muslims coming through because you had Muslims from the Caucasus that were under Soviet Union, considered Europeans, that were making it through at that time. So Chechens and Dagestanis and others that were part of the Caucasus of the Soviet Union. So that's in 24. And then again, as I said, in 65 is part of the legislation that opened the doors back up again.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Rashid Abdel Ghafoor. I became Muslim in Africa 10 years ago, and I've been attending the Muslim Student Association House of Worship on Fridays for about 7 years now. Sorry, I don't mean to go on about myself. This isn't about me. Just a quick story and then kind of a two-part question. I'll try and keep as brief as I can. I don't know if people have made you aware of these statistics, but Montana is about generally the size of Germany as far as land mass goes, fourth largest state in the United States. And we have just over 1 million people. 93% or so of the population is white in Montana, and the majority of those people are either Christian by birth or by choice later on in their life. As far as I know statistically, 8 to 9 million people in the United States identify as being Muslim. Those statistics, as you said, are difficult to establish as to whether or not those people are just born Muslim or they actually practice. So something like 3% or 2.5% of the people in the United States. I'd be surprised if there was 0.3% Muslims in the state of Montana. I was born and raised in Montana. I've lived here my entire life, and so it's rather rare not only to meet Muslim immigrants, even in a city like Missoula, it's a small community of people, but people who become Muslim who are born in the United States or born in Montana specifically. At the end of last year, there was a speaker who came to the Doubletree, which is a hotel close to here, close to the university. And there was other people who were at this, outside of this function that may be able to fill in some of these gaps if I'm incorrect about any of this information, but I believe that the speaker was a Persian, he was an Iranian-American person, and he had become Christian during his life, but I believe he was born Muslim. That was one thing. I can't remember. That is correct. Okay. And he was brought here by a group of people who are generally considered xenophobic and specifically anti-Muslim and anti-refugee. And I would go further as to say anti-Muslim immigrants in general, to talk about the misconceptions about what Islam really is in his opinion. In his opinion, through his education, he relayed to this group of people who I was not a part of, but was listening outside of the door to listen to see what he had to say, because it was $20 to get in, and I wasn't going to pay that to be insulted. But he was relaying that the religion was based around the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and not around Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Interesting.
And that basically Muslims believed in this person who he believed to be a warlike person, and that trickled down from this step to that step. By the end, the thesis was that they believed in someone who was spreading war from 1400 years ago until this time, and that we had, in the United States, had to prepare ourselves for these types of people. My two-part question was, one, have you run into people who were born Muslim, who are no longer Muslim, that give speeches like this in public in California? And two, if you haven't, which I'm assuming maybe you have, but if you haven't, have you met people who were born Muslim who have talked to you about why you should not be Muslim or the evils of Islam?
Okay. So the short answer is no to both of them. I haven't personally encountered people that are no longer Muslim, and I don't want to speculate as to why people do things and make the choices that they make. And I'll leave that at that. But you know, what I find interesting about this claim about Islam being inherently violent is that I think the world would look a lot different if Islam were inherently violent. 1.6, a quarter of the world population, if Islam were inherently violent, I think it would look a lot different right now. That means that if all of those people were doctrinally committed to violence, it wouldn't look like this. It wouldn't look like this. And so that's something that I think about just logically, just pure logic. Now, in terms of this, I mean, people say a lot of crazy things about Islam and what it is and what it is not. Worship the moon, they worship moon gods, and I mean, worship the black stone. I mean, other things such as this. When you look into these individuals that claim them, experts on Islam, be they even members of our own government. John McCain didn't know the difference between a Sunni and a Shi'i when he's writing legislation about Iraq. So you're dealing with the lives of human beings and legislation that is going to be passed on it, and yet you don't have the basic understanding of the difference between a Sunni and a Shi'i Muslim? And yet these are chairs of committees and whatever else. So I'm not surprised that someone would say these types of things. And I'm also not surprised that people have received, been harmed by a type of Islam and a type of practice that is put out even on a state level in many of the countries that we see. But again, I can only say of what I know and what I've studied and the amount of travel that I've had in the world, in access to some of the world's leading scholars right now, be they Western or Eastern, that I've never heard of that before. Two, the second part of the question was, have they ever talked to me as to why I shouldn't be Muslim, I think was the question. Because I haven't met them, they haven't, but I do read some of their stuff. And the thing is, once you have an education, you can begin to debunk this stuff, and it doesn't hold weight. It doesn't hold water, as they say. It doesn't hold water. But as they say, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is the king. So I can come and tell you that Islam is this, and Islam is that, Islam is this, and Islam is that, and if you don't know anything, then that's what it is for you. But then you're confused because, so is it this one that's telling me that's inherently violent, or is it this one who's telling me that it actually is a religion founded on the foundations of peace? So someone can say, well, wait, there's the verse of the sword in the Quran. You know, وَاقْتُلُوهُمْ حَيْثُ وَجَدْتُمُوهُم. You know, kill them wherever you find them. That is a verse in the Quran. I cannot tell you that it's not. But what does it actually mean? What's the context that it was revealed in? Who is it talking to? Who is it talking about? And is it essential? Is it universal? Scholars will say absolutely not. Because if it were, it would abrogate 33 other verses in the Quran that talk about having relationships with people of other faiths that are based on peace, that are based on coexistence. So again, when you begin to look into the tradition at a deeper level, and you're able to push out kind of the emotional response, and you can sit with someone that's also not going to whitewash things, but you come to a different understanding of it. I don't want to claim this, but one of the things that I often find incredibly interesting, I'll say, is the amount of money that people are receiving for this type of work.
And where it comes from.
And where that money comes from.
Yeah.
So, and again, I'm not saying that's the only reason, but yet, I'll tell you what, it would feel real good if I was being paid 60 G's for this talk tonight. So, but, and also booked over and over and over again, and booked by actually, you know, government agencies as well too, who are bringing these type of people in.
Yeah.
So you're receiving federal funding now for these types of gigs.
Just to put a cap on it, there was 4 or 5 times the amount of people outside with signs saying that don't come into this, or we don't want people in this town, as there were inside that paid. So you can see how Missoula is and what we think in general as the majority of the population doesn't think that.
Well, my host told me something really beautiful today. He said in Missoula we live 10 miles from Montana. So I thought that was really interesting. I thought that was interesting. Sir. I'm sorry, to the gentleman behind you.
So the sponsoring group is Act for America,
Right.
which was established by a Lebanese American Christian whose family was harmed in the Lebanon Civil War.
Civil War.
She has great bitterness
Maronite?
towards.
Is that Maronite Christian?
I'm not. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so she carries a great deal of bitterness from
The
Lebanon
Civil
and
War.
her family and the conflict, and so.
No, and Fear Inc., if you look at this, there's a couple of friends of mine who've put together this study about where this money is coming from. And I can understand where she's, honestly, I can understand where that comes from. It's the same, but it's the same insanity when you hear something like 78% of Muslims polled condone suicide bombings. Because when you find out is that the people that are being interviewed are people who've had their families obliterated by Hellfire missiles, or someone who's had their house demolished, or someone who's had all of their males arrested, or someone who's been tortured, or someone whose family has been raped, or something like that. So yes, in anger and emotion, they're going to respond in that way. Yes, I condone suicide bombings, right? So again, you have to look at who this poll, like you said here, right? Yeah, my family was killed by Muslims in the civil war in Lebanon. That's all I know from them. That's to me why the bumper sticker is so insane, that I learned everything I needed to know about Islam on 9/11. I mean, that's crazy. That's to me as an African American saying, I knew everything I need about white people because you all were slave masters. Yeah. So every single human being that I'm going to meet now who's white, forget the people that have helped me incredibly through my life, and everything else that I've seen that is good, I'm going to side all of that aside, right? But it's insane. It's a place of insanity. Really, it is. It's everything that I know about Islam I learned on 9/11. It's just insane. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to say, among other things, that I am 1/4 Maronite, and that I've come to this place because Yeah, I'm not opposed to organized religion, for if it helps other people, but it's not something I want in my life. And, I'm having a hard time articulating this because there's so much in this to unpack, but, I'm really here from a place of trying to understand this. And, there's that side of it too. I just wanted to represent that. And on that note, I always heard Damascus was a really cool city, so I wanted to hear maybe a little bit about what your experience was like living in Damascus.
First, I want to say thank you for sharing that, right? It's really coming from a place I feel of caring, and for this to come here and then to share that as well too. I just want to acknowledge that. Thank you for that. Thank you for your courage. Damascus was amazing. I didn't know anything about it. Really, I just converted in 1996. I put a backpack on. I traveled through India, Pakistan, Jordan, Palestine, and Saudi. And then when I got home, someone said, "Hey, would you like to go to Damascus to go study Islam?" I said, "Sure." And came back 5 years later. But it was really. I don't know. I don't even know what to say. I don't even know what to say. I mean, we were met with hospitality. We were met with love. We were met with humanity. And so when people say, they hate us, I'm like, you have no idea. You have no idea. And if we can't separate foreign policy from human beings from the Muslim side, right? That's one issue, which I think that people get. They get that. And it's not a hatred of Americans, right? But when you're on the receiving stick, walk tall and carry a big stick is a great foreign policy when the stick is in your hand. Right? When the stick is on your back, it's a different reality. That policy looks a lot different. And so when you've seen, I was just thinking the other day, I'm born in 1969. What does my life look like as an Afghan? That means at the age of 10, my country on December 19th is invaded by Afghans. But all I heard about was stories of the valor of the fighting off of the British occupation, right, from the former generation. So you're talking about from 1979, a perpetual state of warfare until 2017. And we're expecting that people are all of a sudden going to embrace a liberal democracy out of perpetual warfare from 1979? And so when we talk about, sorry, I just digress a little bit from your question, but incredibly, the history of the place, the people, the amount of education, women's education, no one talks about that. The school that I went to, there's about 5,000 students there. I think 3,500 were female, right? So this idea that Islam prevents women from certain cultures that practice Islam prevent women from education. Let's get that straight first, right? So this is something. Highly educated women. We had women, female scholars there that we studied with. So again, it was really it's an incredible place. It's heart-wrenching for me. I don't watch, and I can't look at any of the news. Of what's coming out of there, and I won't allow myself to, because as one French philosopher said, to continue to look at this imagery over and over again and not do anything about it borderlines voyeurism. So I stopped after the Haiti earthquake when I heard that. I stopped looking at any of these images. They don't enter my heart. I won't allow them to.
How would you propose we as individuals or community begin to combat the issue of prejudice or ignorance towards
Well, one of the things I think is that, thank you for that question. It was a difficult question. I hope no one asked that question. One of the things is that we also have to look at it as how did it happen? Muslims are not the first. This is not the first ethnic group to happen. And as an African American, I have to think about that. Like, what were the turning points? What were the things that kind of changed this paradigm? Honestly, as I said, I think, and this is also a blame on the Muslim community as well too, is that the Muslim community actually is quite insular. right? So there isn't this ability for the type of engagement, I think, that can happen for people to learn about who you are. I think the greatest push forward outside of the civil rights movement and normalizing African Americans in this country was the Cosby Show. I truly believe that.
Sorry?
The Cosby Show.
Oh, the Cosby.
Because now you had a parent, you had a nuclear family, father was a physician, right? Mom was a lawyer. So it normalizes people. And I think what happens is that we have this idea of who people are. So it's one thing perhaps if I'm prejudiced towards someone that I actually know who they are. It's a compounded prejudice when I'm ignorant and I'm prejudiced against something I don't even know what it is. So I think the first step is like, okay, be prejudiced against who I actually am. You know, and we'll start the conversation from there. I'm being a little facetious. But this idea is that, it's something that we think about, that we talk about, and at times I'm fearful that we're great at social critique, but we don't have the answers right now as to how to make that happen. And I'm a proponent of just kind of on the grassroots level. I don't know that there's going to be this massive kind of movement that happens. Maybe it will. I just don't know if that's where we're at right now. But I really think that it's for someone to be able to say, I'll just give an example of myself. John mentioned that I hunt. John knows that, there's a man that I'm friends with. I mean, he is a staunch Trump supporter. Staunch. He owns a hunting apparel company. He reached out to me and asked me if I would do it. This is before a lot of things happened, but he reached out to me before the election and asked me if I would do an interview for his company about a Muslim, or about a person who didn't grow up hunting, took it on later in life, and then is wearing his clothing from his company. And I thought about it for a while. I talked to a lot of friends, no, don't do it, you're crazy, you're insane, he supports Trump and hunters for Trump and all this other stuff. But at the end of the day, I need to have someone that close that's Trump that can say, hey, wait a minute, that policy that you're talking about, that's going to affect Dawood and his family. Right? So now it's no longer Muslims. It's Dawood Yasin and his wife and 4 daughters. And I was at a conference at Yale Divinity School hosted. It was 10 Muslims, 10 Jews, 10 Christians, and we were together for about 2 weeks. And there were Muslims, Christians, and Jews they came from all over. There rabbis came from Israel. Everybody was there. And one of the rabbis said to me, he said, look, I've never met a Muslim before. And he said, you have broken all of the stereotypes. And he was ultra conservative. He said, you have broken all of the stereotypes that I have held in my life up to this point right now. And, what does it mean to me when I hear rockets being launched into Tel Aviv? It means that I have to think about now him and his family sitting down perhaps to have dinner, to have a rocket come through their window. But that doesn't happen if I don't meet them. And that's why I keep saying that I feel that this power that will move us forward will only come once we engage one another and humanize one another and can have feelings, right, for one another. Sir.
So you said a book, African Muslims and Slaves in America?
Enslaved in the Americas.
In the Americas. Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Sylvian Diouf.
I'm a big fan of history,
Okay.
especially because being first generation American, my family's from the Caribbean.
Okay.
So I was just wondering, is there another book that you know of that explain the history that has been erased or is trying to be erased?
Yeah. I think his name is Gerald Dirks, Dirks.
I can connect you to
I can find that for you. It's also something else that's That's quite good, just giving an alternative view. Yeah. But if you're really a buff of history, I don't know if you've read this or not, but to read Zinn's.
Twice.
Great. People's History of the United States. People's History of the United States. And they also have a children's version as well, too, which is great. Yes, ma'am.
I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about Zaytuna College.
Zaytuna College. So first of all, so Zaytuna means olive tree, if you will. And Zaytuna it's actually named after a university in Tunisia, which is called Zaytuna, that one of our co-founders, there are 3 co-founders, 2 are converts and 1 is Palestinian. He also teaches at UC Berkeley. We're not affiliated with UC Berkeley, we're our own college. We received our accreditation in 2014, March of 2014, by the Western School Association of Schools and Colleges, the same accrediting body that accredits UC Berkeley and Stanford and other schools in that area because it's by region. We're a small liberal arts school, so we actually take the great books tradition, the trivium, the quadrivium, and we lay it right next to a traditional Islamic education. So they're studying Kant, they're studying Hume, they're studying Hadith, they're studying Quran, they're studying grammar, logic, rhetoric in both traditions. They're studying philosophy. So really looking to revive what was Dorothy Sayers' Lost Tools of Learning 1948 essay and bring that tradition back. Poetry, art. Our students study astronomy. They're studying Euclid math, Euclid's Essentials. So we're really trying to look back into our tradition, and because really we don't see them as two separate traditions. We see that as this is what, as an educated Muslim, this is what you studied. It's grammar, logic, and rhetoric. It's nahu, mantiq, and balagha in Arabic, and that would be what you would start off as in studying. So that's what we're trying to do. We're very small. We have 2 buildings that we've purchased in Berkeley, which at times I scratch my head because I'm thinking we should have a campus in Missoula, Montana. So we could get more room, but as I said, we have 50 students. Our students, we can't accept international students, so all of our students are from the States. We have split pretty much down the middle in terms of gender, maybe a little bit higher, 54% or 52% are female to male ratio. Our students, we've graduated. This will be our, so 14, 15, 16, 17, this will be our fourth graduating class this year. Students go on mostly into further studies, master's, PhD. One of our students last year who was straight out of high school got into law school. She's at the University of Illinois, Urbana or Champaign, I can't remember. So we're there. We do have a relationship with UC Berkeley, which is really interesting. One of our donors who gave a gift to the college gave a very specific gift, which was for female students interested in STEM. So now they can take classes at UC Berkeley without having to matriculate, as long as they're a full-time student at Zaytuna College. So we have money that's offered for that. We have our first student right now who will finish all of her pre-med recs, although she took a year, prior to coming to Zaytuna, she did a year of work, but she'll graduate, God willing, as our first pre-med student. Both of her parents are physicians, are doctors as well too, so it's in her blood, I guess. But yeah, it's as I said, we're right in downtown Berkeley. We have 2 campuses. And it's interesting because again, we talk about the insanity of the time that we're in now in ISIS and violence and all this. We're also recipients of that, right? Our co-founder gave a sermon called "The Crisis of ISIS." It was translated into Arabic. It has millions of views. We had the FBI come to campus because of a death threat from ISIS in their English language periodicals that there is a hit out for the president of our college. So this isn't something, everyone is being affected by this thing. Everyone's being affected by this. But it just, as he said, it just gives me more energy to push forward, to do what we're doing. And I really think that what's happened is that the way that this cultural hegemony, or however you want to call it, is being set up is that Muslims look west now. They're looking west. We have, Azhar University, which is one of the oldest institutions, we have asking us to aid them in curriculum development. One university in Saudi Arabia asking us to aid them in curriculum development. So this is a major paradigm shift that can happen right now in terms of what education will look like throughout the Muslim world, based on this project. So that's who we are, and what we're trying to do. You're welcome. Pre-accreditation, you're not allowed to, and we haven't gotten to that point yet internally of where we're at. I mean, can you imagine? I can't even get on a plane without Homeland Security, having to jump through 75 hoops. Could you imagine, we open up an applicant pool to global Muslims to come to America? So, yeah. Sir?
I'm just curious, what is the internal dialogue in the Muslim world, at least the world that you know, about ISIS or ISIL? Because I would like to be able to walk around and talk to my contemporaries about ISIS. To me, the analogy would be like street gangs in LA or Chicago, where I grew up in that area. That's what they are. And they're calling themselves Muslims or whatever they're calling themselves. But what's the internal dialogue about ISIS?
Yeah, I mean, that's it right there.
Okay.
This is I say abomination. This is some sort of, excuse my language, our co-founder, it's a bastardized version of Islam. And that's what we have right now. And it stems from this idea that there's no need for scholarship, right? We can access the text. That's what text says right there. You're reading it as plain as I am, which is just pure insanity, right? It's pure insanity. So that's what, that's where the majority of us are looking at this thing, and that's the other thing, I think it's something crazy, like 84% of the violence enacted by these are on Muslims. Of the violence so it's not like, it's just, Muslims are kind of have a blind eye to it and let it happen. No, they're the recipients of the violence. So which is just insane. I mean, it's just insane. When you look at their tradition, and again, the sanctity of life and other things such as this, but that's where it is. I mean, that's where it is.
The Bible's been used in the same way, but
Absolutely.
the people that say there's the creationists and the so-called fundamentalists, they use little
The Inquisition.
These passages out of the Bible the same way.
Yeah. And everyone's got, this is what one of our other co-founders mentioned. He said, people that have psychosis, irrespective if there's a religious text or not, they're going to continue with their psychosis, with their acts.
Yeah.
It's just now some sort of justification, some divine justification that God is on your side.
Yeah.
ISIS are iconoclasts as well. They'll destroy anything that's visually against what they believe, no matter how ancient or incredible that it is. Has happened in Palmyra and a bunch of other cities in the Middle East.
And that's what I was referring to in terms of also the destruction of the manuscripts, right? Because this is seen as some sort of heretical, practice of Islam. I mean, and so burn it all, And so when you talk about this kind of, I mean, this is being careful of it, that this is what this kind of, Islam needs a revolution or something. You hear that at times. This is what it looks like. So be careful what you ask for, because this is what it looks like. I saw a hand. Someone over here. Question.
Dawood, how did you come to Islam? If you don't mind sharing details.
Yeah. I don't know. It's a long story. I think I just think I was searching for something that resonated with me in terms of, I think one of the things that was just simplicity of creed, in terms of creator and creation, and that you are bound to the creator. In what you say, do, and act, and think, and don't do, and I don't know. I just feel that it was something that spoke to me. I'll just be honest with you. One of the things I also enjoyed is the discipline, the challenge. I was quite competitive. I like to think I was quite competitive as an athlete. I don't like to lose, and so now I don't even let my kids beat me in checkers. So it's like, take that, chess now. But the idea is that I enjoy the challenge of 5 daily prayers, right? And one scholar said, in terms of like, it hits you at every state that you find yourself: happy, sad, satiated, hungry, thirsty, right? So it's not like, hey, I feel good right now, let me go pray. Or things are really bad in my life right now, let me go pray. It's a constant reminder to connect you with the divine in any state that you find yourself in. And then he continued by saying that normally what happens is at the time that you don't think you need is when you need God the most. And that's something that I found, just personally. But again, it's something that again, and I think it's just a personal journey for everyone to find that thing that brings them the solace. And for me, life that I was at prior to this, it definitely has brought that into my life.
Now you did your fast.
I have. Yeah. It's interesting. You just to push yourself to see what are you made of, so to speak. Just to push yourself. And if you find yourself in a place where you can't do that, then you would break your fast. Yes, there's a hand here.
Ramadan is coming up, and I was wondering if the preschool does anything special for that time for the students.
You give them more homework.
Yeah, does anything change?
Well, this is the first year, really, because it moves, right?
Yeah.
So we're based off of a lunar calendar. So actually tonight is the last night of a month which is called Rajab. And now, at sunset, we've moved into what's called Sha'ban. Sha'ban is the 8th month of the lunar calendar. And now that means that there's 30 days before Ramadan. So the new crescent is visible tonight. So we have a moon sighting. So actually we take our students out, we actually sight the moon as part of their astronomy lab. But what's happened is that for the 4 years that I've been there, Ramadan falls in the summer. And we don't have summer classes, although we have a summer Arabic intensive, and it's for our freshman cohort and for students, or for anyone can come to that can be a student in the summer Arabic intensive. We start a little bit later. So for example, 6 hours of instruction, classes start at noon and go to 6 p.m. There's a nightly prayer that happens called Taraweeh, which is really interesting because Taraweeh comes from a root in Arabic, which is raha yurihu, it means to rest. So it's like after you're fasting, come and listen to a 30th of the Quran, which normally takes about 2 hours. pray, and that's how you rest. Still trying to work that one out. But so Tarawih, in the past, we've also offered a meal for the breaking of the fast at sunset. So we've organized a meal for students in Ramadan. But I think just the nature of the month itself, it actually changes people, which is really incredible to see, that transformation that happens during that time. So yes, we're literally one month out from the start of Ramadan. Yeah.
Good, Dawood.
Yeah. I really thank you all. Really thank you all. It's been a great conversation, and I hope that you've benefited. And again, all I can say is just keep doing what you're doing. Just keep doing what you're doing. It's incredibly important in the time that we're living in, because my 11-year-old, I was actually here on election day. I was in Missoula. And, my 11-year-old, when I got home, she said, are we going to be hurt? Are people going to come and hurt us? And we should be people that will take a stand, that will say, for her and her generations, absolutely not. Absolutely not. That we actually have moved beyond that. So that's our hope, that's our prayers, that's our desire. But again, it takes work, and you all are doing that work. May God increase you in that work, and may that your engagement here be an inspiration for others and inspiration to yourself as well too, to continue doing this, because it is the type of work that is needed for the type of society that we all want to live in, right? And that's why I think, in spite of all of our flaws, it makes it an incredible place for us to be living. Incredibly blessed to be living here. And so yes, I thank you so much. And again, I hope that this is one of many engagements that you have, not only with our community, but other communities as well too, to show your support and love that you've done for me. I thank you so much.